Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Generation 180's Virginia Drives Electric Virtual Town Hall. My name is Stuart Gardner, and I'm one of your hosts for tonight. Generation 180 is a national nonprofit organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia, working to inspire and equip individuals to take action on clean energy. We recently released the Virginia Drives Electric report, highlighting that now is the time to address emissions from Virginia's transportation sector by accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles. Tonight, we have the opportunity to talk directly with Virginia General Assembly members about why Virginia should prioritize transportation electrification. Thank you to our partners who helped support this event, including the Sierra Club, Virginia Conservation Network, Virginia League of Conservation Voters, Virginia Clean Cities, Virginia Advanced Energy Economy, and the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And a special thank you to our team members working behind the scenes supporting this event. And now introducing our moderator for tonight, Blair St. Ledger Olson. Blair?
That's me. Thanks, Stuart. Tonight we're joined by 8 members of the Virginia General Assembly from across the Commonwealth. Senator Hashmi, Delegate Bagby, Delegate Bulova, Delegate Keam, Delegate Lopez, Delegate Plum, Delegate Rasoul, and Delegate Reid. Due to the extraordinary amount of questions submitted in advance of this event, we're going to dive straight in. If you still have a question you'd like to submit, please use the Q&A feature, not the chat. Each constituent question will be directed to a specific panelist, but we invite follow-up responses from all of our General Assembly members here. So let's dive into our first question, which is for Senator Hashmi. Starting us off is Dr. Laura Andrico, Director of the Mid-Atlantic Center for Children's Health and the Environment. Laura?
Thanks, Blair. And thanks to everyone for being here tonight. Over the past 9 months, we've seen more clearly than ever the connection between air quality and public health. What steps in the Virginia legislature are you taking to help prioritize air quality in the Commonwealth?
Well, good evening, and I'm so pleased that so many people are joining us for this important conversation. And thank you, Laura, for such a wonderful question. You're absolutely right that we need to draw the connection between air quality and health and the kind of consequences that we see, not just in our state, but throughout the country when we don't regulate air quality effectively. And it's especially important during this period of time. One thing I would urge everyone on this call is to continue to make it a priority, continue to speak out and reach out to your representatives, and certainly make sure that we in the General Assembly are addressing this critical concern. As we know that too often in the past, these concerns have been put to the sideline. And many times that's been because poor air quality and the consequent health implications affect those who are among our most vulnerable population, low-income communities who are disproportionately affected by poor environmental issues. And we have to correct that and address those issues. So really, in many ways, air quality concerns are part of the environmental justice issues that we have to address in the Commonwealth. And so air quality and connecting that to environmental justice is a top priority. And last year in the 2020 session, we moved pretty aggressively on addressing the issues of environmental justice. We now have definitions in the Commonwealth about what we mean by environmental justice. And this year in 2021, we are expanding those acts of environmental justice to be much more encompassing, to have regulations and to have interagency cooperation when we move to think about how we enact those issues of environmental justice. And you'll recall that in 2020, we also enacted the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which is very important to reduce carbon emissions by 2045. We in Virginia are now partners of the RGGI Compact. So helping to bring down greenhouse emissions is going to certainly have an impact on our air quality and health results as well. We're also focusing on solid waste management, on the air quality issues that result from large landfills and organic waste. And also we need to continue in the regulation of vehicle emissions and work steadily in all of these areas. So in these many ways, we are able to have meaningful impact through legislative action.
Thank you.
Blair?
Go ahead, Delegate Bulova.
Thank you. I just wanted to build off of something very important that Senator Hashmi mentioned, and that's the idea of connections. And so with respect to air quality, it links to a number of other priorities that I know that us as legislators deeply care about. One of them is the Chesapeake Bay. And so an item that we're really struggling with in the General Assembly is how do we clean up our polluted stormwater runoff from our roads, our parking lots, our impervious areas. And so you just have to think about, so where does that pollution come from? And actually a good part of that pollution comes from air emissions that ultimately go ahead and settle back down on the ground and then are washed into our creeks and streams. And so there's, in addition to the health benefits and other benefits to having clean air, it also directly affects our ability to clean up the Chesapeake Bay, which is also an economic driver and a cultural force for Virginia.
Absolutely.
Blair, can I just piggyback on something really quickly?
Of course.
With the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and going back to the Clean Air Act reauthorization back in 95 and 96, we finally have been thinking about these issues in terms of environmental health. And so the fact is, when we had so many red attainment days, especially in the Valley, especially in Northern Virginia, and it's gotten better, but it's still not completely the way it should be in terms of avoiding all red attainment days. If you're immunosuppressed, if you're elderly, or if you're an infant, you have a hard time breathing on those days. If you're asthmatic, that's a real issue. And so addressing electric vehicles is a significant part of how we finally address clean air. And by extension, the public health issues that matter so much to folks who are asthmatic, who have lung disease, who are immunosuppressed, maybe have heart disease.
Thank you everyone for those great responses. And thank you, Laura, for joining us and advocating for EVs. Next, we're going to move on to our next constituent. So we'll now hear from Andy, who's from Southwest Virginia, and his question is for Delegate Rasoul.
Well, good evening. My family bought an electric vehicle early this year. We absolutely love driving it and now make about 80% of our trips in it. We also installed a solar power system that charges that electric vehicle and powers our home. While our family is seeing some great cost savings and other benefits, we hope that our adoption of these technologies is having a positive impact beyond our own backyard. So my question for you is, how does increased vehicle usage fit into the larger picture of creating a greener, more resilient, and more secure power grid in Virginia?
Yeah, and thank you so much for I have some people from our home base down here in Southwest Virginia. Thank you, Blair, and everyone for putting this together. For sure, some of these investments that are being made are critically important. 48% of the pollution that we have comes from vehicles, and about 2/3, roughly 70%, comes from personal vehicles. So we appreciate you, making that investment. Yourself, I personally own a plug-in electric vehicle, and we have solar panels, and so I always try to figure out when's the best timing to put those things together, and studying kind of the flows there for sure. But as we move forward and think about what 2030 is going to even look like, and how autonomous vehicles fit in, and what the new technology is going to be. Look, in the short term, we just have to, it's critically important to make sure that new technology is accessible. And what we have, the common perception is, especially maybe in this part of the state sometimes, is that the technology, whether it be solar panels or electric vehicles, maybe isn't always as cost accessible. And what we've seen is that the price continues to come down, both on both fronts, for sure. When we installed our solar panels on our house, we took advantage of a 30% tax credit. In purchasing electric vehicles, there are still some tax credits at the federal level. So I see in the future, as time progresses, as technology advances, that, the kind of passenger miles per capita might even decrease in the very long run as we, become more efficient in the use of these autonomous vehicles. But in the short term, we've got to figure out ways to make sure that it is more accessible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delegate Rasoul.
Thank you.
And thank you, Andy, for joining us. Our next constituent is Shelley Francis, who is joining us tonight representing EV Noir and EV Hybrid Noir. And her question is for Delegate Bagby.
Delegate Bagby, good evening. What are some examples? Good evening. What are some examples of concrete steps that legislators can take to ensure that frontline communities, and I mean Black, Latinx, and tribal communities, are centered and engaged throughout efforts as we work to increase awareness and electrify the transportation sector?
Well, it's a bit difficult in this environment, and thank you for that question, but it's a bit difficult in this environment. But it's also a great opportunity for those individuals, such as my friend Sam Rasoul just mentioned, our friends in Southwest and our friends, particularly in rural communities, have a hard time getting to meetings and so forth that individuals in maybe urban communities may easily access, particularly here in Richmond. And, I think about my constituents back when I was representing Charles City, and the population there is extremely diverse. I always get it wrong, but I think they say in Charles City they have three histories or three ethnicities, 2 rivers for 1 county, and so we need to find a way to bring individuals back into the fold. But I think the more communication that and opportunities to have conversations like the one we're having right now, the better, because as we are even approaching the legislation that we worked on in the special session, is no different than this legislation that we're approaching as it relates to clean energy. It's focused on a number of industries, individuals, communities coming together to find solutions. And the only way that we do that is making time to talk and taking time to listen. And so I appreciate my colleagues being here tonight, but it's also important for us to be able to have some off the grid conversations with you all as well. So hopefully you all feel comfortable emailing us, calling us, having conversations with our LA. And always remember, having conversations with our staff is sometimes better than having conversations with us. We're part-time, they're full-time, and so they're dedicated and able to work with not only you all, but also with the administration and those individuals that are working on this day-to-day to find solutions. And so again, don't be shy about communicating with us. Only thing I would say that I really get a little iffy about is when you have a mass email and all the emails are the same. I don't know what that's called, and they just changed the name of it.
Email banking.
Email banking. I mean, I don't know what my colleagues feel, how my colleagues feel about it. Some of it is good, but some of it just kind of, it makes you it's almost like you get immune to the communication. And a legislator loves to hear from their constituents. I appreciated hearing from Lopez constituents, but when you tell me that you live in my district, you get my attention much faster. And a lot of this legislation is going to require us having a broad support, not just those individuals that live in districts that voted for Joe Biden. We need to lean on those other individuals to let them know that we support clean energy.
Thank you.
I want a list of everyone who's calling you from my district. That is unacceptable.
They want me to move there.
Just forward
I
them.
tell you.
Yes. Delegate Bagby, I'll be reaching out to you.
Senator Hashmi, would you like to quickly add?
Yes, I know we're pressed for time, but just to quickly add to Shelley's question about how do we incentivize particularly low-income communities in being able to access clean cars, electric vehicles. As we all know, they're currently out of reach for many of us. Many of our families simply can't afford to drive clean vehicles. But there are some states that are doing some really interesting programs, such as providing rebates or money to change cars from gas guzzlers to cleaner vehicles. And I think there's some creative options. These rebates are based on income. And so if individual families are income eligible, they're able to access those rebates or that funding to secure electric vehicles or low emission vehicles. And I think that kind of creative thinking is something we ought to look at seriously in Virginia.
Well, Senator Hashmi, you bring up a great point and definitely some topics that we're going to get into later this evening. Delegate Bagby, you mentioned something very on point for creating broad support for these issues, and that brings us to our next question.
And it's weird because I promise you, as we were speaking, the Chief Atkins from Charles City texted me to tell me to support his budget amendment in the governor's budget.
His ears were ringing.
It's crazy.
Shelley, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to see you. We're now joined by Kale Jaffe, who's from Charlottesville, Virginia, and his question is actually for Delegate Plum.
Thanks very much, Blair, and thank you all.
I hope Delegate Plum comes back. I just realized he's not at his chair.
All right.
There he is.
Well, while we're waiting for him, I'll thank everyone here from both the House and the Senate for being on the call. And it's good to see some old friends that I worked with when I was a state lobbyist. I'm now a law professor at UVA. I direct an environmental law clinic at UVA. My question is for Delegate Plum, and I wanted to ask this to you, Delegate Plum, because I know you've been in the General Assembly back when when Democrats were in control up through the 1990s, and then Republicans in control beginning in 2000, and then of course Democrats back in control of the House again today. And so my question is, how can we build bipartisan support for electric vehicles, regardless of how the balance of power shifts? What is the messaging that we as advocates can use that you see really resonating across the aisle? How do we build that bipartisan support? And I see Delegate Plum, you're muted still.
Delegate Plum, you are still on mute. Sorry. Isn't 2020 fun, everybody?
I don't remember to do that, but I was going to say to Cal, I knew when he said old friend that he was going to call on me, because he and I worked together, I guess, probably a couple decades ago, and I'm glad to know what you're doing now. That sounds very interesting. Sometimes you have to ask a question: is this chicken or the egg that came first? Because is the case that when we look at public policy, is the public's change in perception of what we should be doing, or is it leaders and legislative bodies that bring about change? I actually worked on a Clean Air Act study program for Northern Virginia on adopting EV vehicles. And that study occurred back as the Clean Air Act first got underway more than a decade ago. And it was back when General Motors put out an EV1 vehicle. Anybody remember the EV1? Somehow it didn't last for very long, but at that time it looked like it was a way to go. The public wasn't able to accept it, particularly manufacturers weren't willing to invest in it, so it didn't come about. Times have changed immensely now. The environment is an issue of which all legislators, all political candidates have to have some kind of a response. So that when we look at how it is that the legislature affects public opinion, we're now in a position of where the public, I believe, is driving the legislators to say, number one, we've got to do something about the environment. But number two, there are options now that we never had before. My wife and I bought one of the first Prius vehicles that was sold in Northern Virginia. We've been through, incidentally, 3 of those vehicles, all of them in excess of 150,000 miles. We now have a totally electric vehicle. I don't have the solar panels, Sam, only because my house is not oriented enough that in such a way that I can do that. So it is a situation where the public's perception of both the need to clean up our air, to clean up our environment, that's going to drive us as legislators and as politicians to work together. Who is it's going to take the claim for electrifying Virginia in terms of transportation? I want it to be Democrats, but I know there's some Republicans who want it to be Republican as well. And so when we look at where we want to go with this, I think there's commonalities that we can share with it. You see, this a case now that as I look at electric vehicle manufacturing, or as I look at automobile manufacturing, what I read in the press is that they're all going towards electric. So it's a matter of getting on board. What we used to have to incentivize is now to become a fundamental part of the economy. I'm particularly interested now in school bus electrification. And part of that comes from the fact that I live a couple blocks from a high school that happens to be a focal point for endless number of school buses driving in and out of there in the morning and in the evening. I happen to walk early in the morning a couple miles that goes by that school, and I see what those buses belch out as they come and go in the community. Fairfax County, and you guys on the call, for many of you from Fairfax, know that Fairfax County Schools has a fleet of, is it 1,500 or 2,000 school buses?
Something like that.
It's a huge number. And when you look at the potential savings in terms of clean environment, that's a way to go. I read that some engineers are saying, well, you could have a battery system where you could charge up the school bus to pick up the kids, but you could use the charged up school bus to run other pieces of equipment or building or whatever as an electric energy saving source, as an electric power battery, so to speak. So, Cal, I see it as a case of where, as politicians, if we're smart, Democrat or Republican, we're going to have to run and catch up because the world is moving by us in terms of the success in developing the new technologies, selling them to the public, and we need to get on board. I candidly, as someone who's been interested in this subject for a long, long time, I'm extremely excited about what's going on. And when I see the number of legislators now who are on the call, who are genuinely interested in this, I knew we were going to have progress.
Blair, just to piggyback on something that Kale brought up as well.
Of course, and then Delegate Bulova.
Thanks. One thing I think that's really going to bring a lot of people to the table on an issue like electric vehicles is job creation in Virginia. And so if you're thinking about things from a business perspective, thinking about things from a small business perspective, or thinking about things from an infrastructure perspective, or from a climate perspective, or a clean air or environmental health perspective, there's something that works for everybody, Republican or Democrat. And so, I mean, we know that if the infrastructure alone for creating what's needed for electric vehicles in Virginia is a huge infrastructure lift that will actually create thousands upon thousands of jobs. And so that in and of itself, I think, is a huge step forward. And in fact, of all the studies we've seen, all the national studies we've seen, all the international studies we've seen, and what we know can work in the Commonwealth. And so I think from that perspective, in fact, that we can create jobs, create good paying jobs out of this, as well as address environmental concerns. I think it's a win-win, win-win-win.
Thank you. And Delegate Bulova, do you want to close us out before we get to the next question?
Yeah, thank you, Blair. And Delegate Lopez, I think, touched on what I wanted to address. I never like it when messaging drives policy, but in order to drive good policy, you do need good messages that resonate with different groups. And so whether that is consumer protection, whether that is the environment, whether it's economic growth or jobs, you just have to make sure that you package that right. And I was looking back through some of the bills that I've had over the last couple of years, going back to 2011, when we first passed the bill allowing for paid electric vehicle charging stations. The signing ceremony for that was actually something that was done by Governor McDonnell. And he took pride because it was something that he thought was an economic developer. And as we have continued to unroll these things, we have had Republican co-patrons and chief co-patrons on these things. So again, it's a matter of presenting it in the right way so that you can get a broad coalition on board.
Absolutely agree. Thank you all. Kale, thank you for joining us. Always good to see you. Our next question is from someone who's actually a good friend of mine and has been wanting to go electric. Grace Tuttle is joining us from Charlottesville, Virginia. Oh, I'm sorry, Albemarle, Virginia. I forgot you are outside the city now. You've left us. And her question is actually for Delegate Rasoul as well.
For Delegate Rasoul for answering my question. So Blair update, I actually am spending about 3/4 of my time in rural Bath County now, where my family's from, and 1/4 of the time in Charlottesville. So nearly there. And I was looking into buying an EV, but I ended up purchasing a used hybrid for several reasons. I was worried about the range going back and forth across Virginia, and also the price, and the fact that I don't own the house I'd be charging it at, so I was unsure how it would go. And so my question is, how do you plan to increase EV accessibility in rural communities?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And being in Bath County, you are in the middle of God's country up there. So I'm hopefully you're enjoying it for sure. Look, the reality is that half of Virginians are looking into buying electric vehicles. And the reason why we struggle is because there's always a lack of inventory here in Virginia. So to your first point about trying to make sure that it's affordable, most of the inventory that manufacturers are creating is shipped to one of 15 states that have some kind of clean air standard at the state level. And so I think Virginia certainly needs to head in that direction to make it more accessible. And there's an economies of scale piece here. So as we bring down the cost from economies of scale, we can sell more, which drives down the cost per vehicle. And that cost per vehicle then allows us to be able to invest in vehicles that have a much wider range. So it's going to be very difficult for you to find a great charging station in Bath County. And if you're trying to get from Bath County down to or over to Alfonso's district, I don't know why you would ever go there. But if you're trying to get to Alfonso's district, it might be tough depending on which vehicle that you have. And so what we need to be able to do is invest in those economies. We have done this with other technology in the past. And where we, the government, has stepped in, or we've incentivized private providers to make sure that we make it as accessible as possible. So I hope that we can, number one, adopt those standards here in Virginia, which will increase almost immediately our inventory. So it makes it just more accessible, and it's not so difficult on you and others like you who want to make that investment. And then secondly, try to figure out how we can ensure that we're making those proper investments to bring down the overall cost.
Blair and Stuart, I thought we only had environmentalists on this call tonight. Why is Sam here? Because we know where he stands on most environmental bills, right? I mean,
hold on,
really?
Delegate Rasoul, it is 7:30. I know you need to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Delegate Lopez, you can roast Delegate Rasoul at a later date.
I cede my time to the Lopez. I see.
Nice exit strategy.
Yes. Sorry, I have to run. Thank you so
So,
much, Grace, for the question. Thank you, Blair. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank
so
you.
Blair, Stuart, this is Delegate Reid. I'd like to add just something to the question that Grace had. I think one of the key things that we have to look at, and especially because I've recently bought an electric vehicle, and it really is one of those type of things where you do give more thought to the distance between the charging. But I think between the different things that have happened, like with the VW settlement and the Electrify America, as well as the private providers who are putting charging locations, companies like EVgo, around the state, there's a much greater prevalences of being able to go from one place to another to charge. So I would be willing to bet that you could get from Bath County to Arlington and you'd be able to do it fairly safely. But what's going to happen, and this is the reason why the rebate program that I'm looking at, is that if we think about this, we want to be able to create more demand for the electric vehicles. And then through that increased demand, we'll actually create a greater demand for the charging infrastructure. And then you can just go right on down from that. So You're in that phase, much like a lot of us who have actually purchased electric vehicles now. We're in that early adoption phase. But as Delegate Plum had pointed out, we're on the cusp of what is going to be a revolution in transportation, both in Virginia as well as across the nation. You're just there early with a lot of the rest of us.
Blair, could I also offer?
Yes, but Delegate Bulova actually asked first in the chat, so I'm going to let him go first and then you, Delegate Plum.
All right, thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And I guess getting so that I can go ahead and pile on is that after having a hybrid for a number of years, we finally made the leap to a plug-in electric hybrid. So we got a Honda Clarity, and of course the one thing that kind of popped into our brains was, what is the range, and if we're desperate and need to plug in, how are we going to do that? And of course, I'm up here in Fairfax County, and so it's a different concern here than where you're hailing from, especially a place like Bath County. I think the good thing is that we have models for how we make this work, and so right now we are really focusing on expanding broadband to underserved and unserved areas. And it's simply a recognition that, and a lot of times there isn't the economic push to be able to build out that infrastructure, but it doesn't mean that it's any less important. And from an equity standpoint, we need to make sure that we're getting it out to those underserved and unserved areas. So I think we do have a model for how we could do this. And the nice thing is, of course, that VDOT owns a heck of a lot of right-of-way that snakes through different localities. And so we have an opportunity with the right incentives to create what I think are some really good public-private partnerships to build up that infrastructure.
Thank you. Delegate Plum?
Well, just to kind of build on what David had to say, when you think about buying an all-electric vehicle, that's of course your first concern. But Grace, I've been to Bath County in my all-electric vehicle. You can do it, and what you come to realize after you own one, although when I first thought about investing in an all-electric vehicle, I was really fearful of what would happen. And the answer is, we're totally relaxed now. It all works out. There's lots of opportunities. And why is that true? Well, the Electrify America program and the potential for partnerships. But to show you how far that's coming now as the demand for electric vehicles increases, the number of electric vehicles increase, I should say. We now have in Vienna, Virginia, just a few miles from me, a Wawa. And what's unique about this Wawa station is it doesn't sell gas. It's a Wawa station that has all the features of a Wawa, except it has electric charging stations. As I believe it's 12 electric charging stations and no gasoline. A large company does that because they know that it's a way in which they can make a profit. And when that becomes the case in the private sector, and we take advantage of that in the public sector, we got a win-win situation, I believe.
Awesome. Thank you all. Grace, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe. Hope you're well. Our next question is from Charles. He joins us from Richmond, Virginia, and leads Drive Electric RVA. And his question is for Delegate Reid.
Hi, thank you all for being here. And it's nice to see my Senator Hashmi, who represents my district, here as well. But my question actually is for Delegate Reid. So I own an electric vehicle. I purchased it 6 years ago. It's a Nissan Leaf. Had to drive all the way to Charlottesville to do a test drive because the local Nissan dealers didn't have an EV available for me. So thankfully, once I drove the car, the instant torque and the quiet ride definitely got me hooked. But not everyone was interested in that new technology would be willing to make such a journey. And so speaking of barriers, and we've already been talking about some of this, my question for Delegate Reid is about the two biggest barriers that I see for EV adoption in Virginia. Currently, what are your ideas for reducing the upfront cost of electric vehicles and also ensuring that current owners have access to charging?
So Charles, thank you very much. That's a really great question, and it really hits on a lot of things that have been important to both me and I know other members of the delegates and senators that are here. And I know that Delegate Plum has probably been working on these things much longer than I have. But I will tell you, as far as the upfront cost, one of the things that I have been working on for the past 3 years is to come up with some type of EV rebate program within the state of Virginia, because we're one of the few states who still does not have some type of program. And initially, just to give you an idea, because this kind of speaks to some other things that folks were talking about, this initially started out as the classic idea of doing a tax credit. But a tax credit is only going to be beneficial to people who can actually probably already afford the car. Then it moved to becoming a voucher. And now the legislation that a work group has put together since the session concluded and has driven the legislation that I've now submitted for drafting is to create a rebate program. And what's really been special about this is the fact that folks like the Sierra Club, Volkswagen, the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association, all of those have worked collaboratively in this work group to be able to come up with the processes and the procedures and funding mechanisms and everything to be able to make this work. Because one of the things that I wanted to be sure that we did is that we had some type of rebate program that could actually be, as the auto dealers call it, cash on the hood, so that when you go to buy the vehicle, you know what type of rebate you're going to be getting right then and there. The other thing is I didn't want this to just be for wealthy folks. So to just give you an example, the way that the rebate program is structured right now is if you're buying a new electric vehicle, you would get $2,500. If, however, you are in the federal guidelines for falling below 300% of the poverty guidelines, then you would actually get an extra $2,000. So it would be $4,500. So the idea is that we want to make this affordable to a broad spectrum of people across the community. And if you carry that to the next kind of logical conclusion, you've probably found with your Leaf, and others have found as well, that the total cost of ownership is actually much less for an electric vehicle. With it being much less, I mean, if we do the rebate and we can get other people of different economic means to be able to buy these vehicles, we're actually saving them money over the life of the entire car. So that's one thing that I've been working on, and the legislation has been submitted, and looking forward to be able to move forward with that in this session. As far as the charging is concerned, and I think you've already heard several folks talk about that, is that there are Electrify America, there's the Wawa, which is really kind of revolutionary for them to be able to do that. And I will tell you that I think it was last session, I had considered putting in a piece of legislation that would actually say that any new gas station that was being built needed to have 10% of the pumps would need to be electric. But then what you start to see is that the market is taking care of it by itself, because you drive by a Sheetz and they now have 5 or 6 or 10 different charging facilities, or the Wawa like Ken was talking about. So the market is taking care of itself because there's more demand from people like me and you. And one final thing that I'll just point out to this is that Delegate Bulova and I have been having discussions over the last probably month or 2 months, and I know that I saw something in chat, is that the building code, we'd like to see the building code changed so that multifamily dwelling units of say 50 units or greater would actually have some percentage of the parking spaces set aside for electric vehicle infrastructure. Because we all know that your local homeowners association, your condos association, or the apartment complex is not going to be too thrilled with the idea of you running the extension cord out of your 3rd floor balcony down to your car. So we need to be able to address those things at the General Assembly, and Delegate Bulova and I are working on a letter to the folks at the Virginia Building Code to be able to address that. So great questions, and it covers a really broad range of the topics that we're talking about today.
Thank you so much, Delegate Reid. And I know we're going to dive in more to the EV rebate program later, but I do want to remind folks that Delegate Bagby has to leave us at 7:45. So we're going to let Stockton ask his question next. Thank you so much for joining us. Stockton is a geology professor here in Virginia, or maybe geography. I might have just gotten that wrong. And then after he asks his question for Delegate Keam, we're going to move quickly on to the last question for Delegate Bagby. Thank you, Stockton.
Hi, it's actually a little more confusing. I'm actually geospatial science. And so
it was a G.
It's close. A G.
Can that question go to Bagby, because I can't answer geospatial stuff?
I'll keep it easy. So I'm a professor at Radford University, and I actually study past climate change. And I'm particularly worried about our climate future. And so my family, we've installed solar panels, and we're planning to buy an EV. And in particular, I would like an EV pickup truck because I'm already a pickup truck owner. And my family can afford these things, right? You know, we have 2 incomes, but I want to know a little bit more about accessibility. So Delegate Keam, how can we make EVs more accessible to low and moderate income families in Southwestern Virginia and urban areas? And I'm also just thinking about myself too. There are a lot of people out there that kind of need a pickup truck or some type of heavier vehicle. And we need to make those affordable. How can we do it?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Stockton, and thank you to Blair and Stuart and all the other folks from Generation 180 for hosting us, as well as all the partner organizations. I know there are lots of people based on the channel. It sounds like there are lots of organizations and individuals out there paying attention, so I thank you for that. To your question, one of the good things about this panel that you're seeing here is that you have some of the absolute leaders and the most passionate colleagues of mine who care about these issues. And if anything is going to be done in the next coming, not only this session, but in future sessions, it'll be because of the leadership of my colleagues here, many of whom have been working on these issues for a long, long time. And one thing that I've noticed, and just to frame this, and I know Delegate Bagby needs to leave early, and he's going to be a leader on EV in particular, but on so many of these issues going forward, is for so long, at least the time that I've been in the House for 11 years now, I was in the minority party, and so every year we'd get these books from LCV and other VCN and others. I'd skim through. I said, "What a great idea! I love those ideas. One day we'll do it." But until then, this is just going to sit on my shelf somewhere and look pretty. Well, guess what? Year after year for the last couple of years, we've been addressing one issue at a time. We did amazing work on solar. We did a lot of work on offshore wind, and of course efficiency and many other aspects of it. And then of course environmental justice, something that Alfonso and Ghazala and many of us have been working on. This year is the year that we start the serious conversation about electric vehicles, not only in terms of what you just mentioned, the supply side and making sure that the cost comes down, but also on the demand side to encourage all of our friends, and it sounds like most of our colleagues are already purchasing that. As they're investing it, is it really going to be worth their price? And are we as a government stepping up and doing our part in providing the infrastructure, the charging stations, the partnerships, getting rid of the obstacles that are in the housing code and everything else along the way, so that we become a comprehensive, friendly state for EV and beyond? I think you're going to start seeing many, many aspects of that coming forward this coming session. And I'm happy to work with all my colleagues here to make that happen. Second point on that, specifically about EVs, is it's like any other technology, and some of us have been around here for a few decades of watching the trends, right? Economically, there was a time when hardly anybody would ever think about using a phone that's in your pocket. What was wrong with the one that I had on my wall, right? Some people said, why in the world would I buy a flat screen TV when the one that's round that comes with a cabinet? It was just fine for me. Well, at some point, people realized that there's not only a benefit and a lot of upgrades and lots of cool gadgets and all that, but there's also a cost factor that makes it more economical. That point, that pivot where most people start feeling like, I can't afford it, I'm still waiting, versus, wow, now it's affordable, I am willing to invest. That's exactly the same point that on the supply side, the way market economies go, that's exactly when suppliers say, you know what, this is where we're going to start investing our R&D and start mass producing this stuff. And so where I think about that point, the critical thing that we have to pass in the General Assembly to make that pivot work for us is to mandate, not just encourage, not just voluntary standards, not just feel good stuff, but mandate a different air quality standard to ensure that LEV and ZEV vehicles are available in Virginia. I had a long talk with the governor of Colorado the other day. Their state and many other states have been doing this. California has been doing this. And what they're telling us is the more states pass bills that require ZEV standards in our laws, the more the industry across the board, the auto dealers, manufacturers, they'll all step up and say, boy, it's time to do it. But if it's only 8 states now, I think it is, California leading with about 4 or 5 other states really, taking this on, then the rest of the car dealers will say, you know what, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait till that cost curve comes down. So I think that's something that's really important for us to do. And then one final point on this, in addition to our state, the Commonwealth of Virginia becoming a much more open and progressive and opening for environmental laws, and this type of policy is getting into effect, it's the fact that we now have partners that we can work with in Washington, D.C. And I'm very pleased that a good friend of mine, a guy named Pete Buttigieg, was just named to be the transportation secretary. I had endorsed him early in the campaign, and Mayor Pete is the right guy for the job to help increase the ideas of what we can do as a smart city, smart transportation, and becoming a federal partner so that we can really have some resources and partnerships at the federal and state and local level. So more to come. But final thing before Lamont leaves, I hope he doesn't leave because, well, actually, no, I do hope he leaves, because then I think we'll equalize the number of bearded versus non-bearded legislators. And so I think the way I see it, it's like 4-3 right now. Rasoul would have made 4-4, but hopefully it'll be back to 3-3. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. Thank you, Stockton, so much. Delegate Bagby, our next question is for you, and hopefully we can squeeze it in before you have to leave. We're joined by Liza Borges today. Liza, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you so much, Blair, and Delegate Bagby. First, I just want to thank you for your leadership in the state of Virginia and in helping to move legislation forward on EVs that are going to obviously create a cleaner Virginia for all of us. I'm the CEO of Carter Myers Automotive, a dealer group here in Virginia, and a proponent of the growth of EVs. My husband and I have been driving EVs for a couple years. We've committed to solar energy in our dealerships and our personal home. And while many of us on this call are very comfortable with the range and the charging options of EVs, a lot of Virginians aren't quite there yet. I know that you're aware of research regarding other states where ZEV and LEV mandates have been implemented and what has contributed to the success in customer adoption of EVs. States such as California and others where EVs are now over 8% of the market share have all been successful in large part because available inventory has been combined with consumer rebates, as mentioned earlier, and incentives for both vehicle purchases and home charging infrastructure. They've also combined that with collaborations with utility companies to invest in charging infrastructure. We very much want to see electric vehicles driving on the roads of Virginia, and we will also want to help remove some of the older, less environmentally friendly vehicles from our roads. And we want to see it done in a very affordable way with customer demand. So my question is, there are a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to happen to make significant headway on EV adoption. How can we bring this legislation together to include the availability of EVs through the ZEV-LEV mandate and tie it to the consumer incentives and rebates that are currently being proposed, as well as the commitment for charging infrastructure and consumer education? There are just a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and we would love to see them all come together for a good solution.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, I think what you do and what your team does is very important. Don Hall and the auto dealers have been very helpful as we move and progress through not only this piece of legislation that I'm planning to propose this coming session, but on a number of issues. And you know, we just lost my good friend Tommy, who's leaving to move back with his wife closer to her home. Kudos for him for stepping up and understanding a happy wife is a happy life. But I couldn't agree more. There are a number of pieces to this puzzle. And that's why I'm in love with David Reid's efforts to make sure that there's some sort of incentive. And I also like the idea of making sure that we incentivize those individuals that probably would not be able to consider a LEV or EV vehicle. And you know, we want to make sure that we incentivize and help encourage the market to move more aggressively. But I also agree with Delegate Plum that it's moving in that direction. We're not asking for it to happen immediately. We're giving time for it to occur. But we need to make sure that we set the stage, but also set a marker for when we want this to really occur aggressively. I do think, again, that auto dealers, energy groups, advocates, everyone should have an opportunity to help all these pieces of legislation better. And it is really going to require all hands on deck. And again, I can't express upon it enough the fact that we do need some sort of, I believe we need some sort of incentive to go alongside my legislation that offers a timeline of us moving forward. And I think everyone that I've talked to wants that to occur. And a step further, even considering used vehicles. I don't have all the solutions, but what do we do for used vehicles as we look to sell those from one owner to another? There's a lot of opportunities for us. As Delegate Keam said, years ago we were just wishing and hoping. Now is our opportunity. We have to take the bull by the horns and move it forward. But again, you have my word that we're going to continue the conversation with the auto dealers because we understand. Listen, I was paid my college tuition. The most portion of it, a large portion of it, was paid by the auto dealers because my grandfather was an auto dealer for 40 years. When I was a teacher, I worked part-time as an auto dealer on the weekends and the evenings to supplement my salary. And so I know the value of auto dealers, and how this piece of legislation impacts auto dealers. And we won't take that for granted.
We look forward to being a part of the collaboration to help move it forward. I think it was our Charlottesville dealership that someone had to come travel to get their Nissan Leaf. So
that was Charles.
We look forward to continuing to help.
Thank you so much, Liza. Thank you so much, Delegate Bagby, for joining us. I know you have to go. Delegate Reid, I think you would like to follow up, though.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Blair. And I just wanted to say hi and thank you to Lisa and her husband, Pete, because they were two of the folks who really got involved in the work group that we had over the summer to be able to draft the electric vehicle rebate program. And I think it just really highlights, and to speaking what Delegate Bagby was saying, the real key to being able to be successful with any type of EV rebate program is going to be sure that we include the dealers from the very beginning, because those are the people who actually have the in-person contact with the actual people who are buying vehicles. And so we have to be able to get that money to them so that they can have those discussions when people are actually purchasing those vehicles. And one other thing that I wanted to add to that was also that the program that I'm working on as well would include used vehicles, used electric vehicles, because that's a key market that we need to be able to address, because not everybody can afford a brand new vehicle, but someone can still benefit from the electric vehicle, the lower cost of ownership, if they go to a local automobile dealer and are able to buy a used Leaf or a used BMW i3, and maybe 95% of their commuting is going to be less than 100 miles. So they'll be able to go charge it up at night, and they may never have to spend money on gas again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Delegate Bagby, for joining us. It is 7:53, so if you have to leave, I totally understand, but I'm so grateful for you being a part of this conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to leave it on. I'm just going to take the video off.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, our next question is actually going to be read by me. This question was submitted from Amandine from Kia, living in Northern Virginia, but we've been unable to get her video to work. So I'm going to read this question off for her, and it's for Delegate Bulova. So Delegate Bulova, how can we ensure equitable access to charging infrastructure for people who live in apartments and condos? As we've heard tonight, charging access is a key part of garnering more access for electric vehicles across the country, and particularly in Virginia. How do you respond?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And in the same way that you have charging issues in your rural areas, same thing with respect to multifamily units, apartments, condos, because unlike me, when I bought an electric vehicle, I can put it into my carport and you have easy access to plug in. And of course, living in a townhouse or in a multifamily unit, it's a little bit more difficult unless you've planned that out. And so there's two ways that we need to tackle this. And so one of them is, what do we do with existing units and land use where they aren't built out for electric vehicle charging stations or access to electricity for your cars? And so, one area that you can look at are what are the incentives to help retrofit those properties? And again, so you can either do that through grants or loans, or you can do it through public-private partnerships, which could be an exciting way in order to be able to incentivize that. Something that we've been working on in the Housing Commission, and so I'm chair of the General Laws Committee, and under that comes housing issues. And we actually have a Housing Commission that works on these kind of issues in the off year. And so we've been trying to figure out, how do we make sure that, unless a homeowners association's declarations outright prohibit it, provide some power to somebody living in an HOA or a condo association with the ability to go ahead and charge up or even install the infrastructure themselves if they really wanted to. So that's kind of one thing, is how do we go back and solve for where we haven't done that planning. Where I think that there's a lot of potential is where we are putting in new multifamily infrastructure or new communities. How do we make sure that those are planned for electric vehicles? And so Delegate Reid had mentioned the building code. We tend not to legislate the building code, but they are very responsive when legislators ask them to look at specific issues. And so Delegate Reid and I are going to spearhead that. But the other thing is that you can also incentivize these things or require them through subdivision ordinances, zoning ordinances, through proffers. And so we need to make sure, again, that local governments are considering this when they are doing land use approvals and making sure that these neighborhoods or these condo units are ready for electrification or electric vehicles as they come through. So again, a lot of stuff that we need to work on, but absolutely essential if you expect people to be able to purchase an electric vehicle where they then go home and they need to be able to charge up overnight or when they're not using their vehicle on the road.
Would anyone like to add?
If I might just add to the wonderful comments made by Delegate Bulova, I think we have a lot of opportunities, again, to be really creative in our urban environments. In the evenings, we have a lot of parking lots that sit empty. We have church parking lots that are empty through much of the week. We have school parking lots that empty out at night. So if we can engage in public-private partnerships or use city-owned properties to put charging stations in those areas, particularly for people who live in urban environments and need access, they don't have garages and they need access to the charging stations. There's a lot of opportunities that we can engage in to make those more readily available and also be safe and creative options for many of our residents.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both for that answer. So our next question is from Finus, and that actually is for you, Senator Hashmi. Finus is joining us from Richmond, Virginia. And Finus, will you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. Traditional car dealerships have, and I can say this because I own an EV, purchased a number of years ago, but I had to actually travel quite a bit across the state in order to test drive, etc., and then purchase my EV. But traditional car dealerships have proven on average to be a barrier to EV adoption here in Virginia. What can Virginia do to help empower those dealerships to embrace EV technology so that we can increase the acceptance of it in our communities?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think we've been kind of addressing that issue from a variety of different perspectives. And as has been stated earlier, a lot of this is going to be driven by consumer demand. And that's the game of the market, right? So if we are able to incentivize consumer demand, we're certainly going to see opportunities for car dealerships to be more invested in EV and to be able to provide and respond to consumer needs. But we also need to be thinking about the issues from the car dealership perspective. They have to be able to make a reasonable profit. We can't expect them to hold these vehicles on their lots unless we can assure that they are going to be able to make reasonable profits off of the sales. And thinking again creatively, providing tax breaks, rebates, incentives for the consumer, and also similar incentives perhaps for our dealerships is one way to start that market to move forward. I would think increasing education and incentives for our sales staff. They're the frontline individuals who are right there at the dealerships, and the more knowledgeable they are, the more they're able to convey the real benefit and the value of electric vehicle ownership, then sales will similarly increase. And you and I and others on this call know that ultimately, even though the upfront cost of an electric vehicle may be heavy for many families, the long-term savings are tremendous, and particularly when families are heavily dependent on a personal vehicle, being able to invest in something that will give them good return for their money over the course of the next few years is very important. So educating our sales staff, providing the motivation for the dealership, increasing consumer demand is all part of how we're going to see the movement on greater sales in our dealerships.
Delegate Lopez, and then Delegate Reid, and then Delegate Keam, if you guys would like to add your own context as well.
Sure. Well, one thing is that, how do I put this? There's really a lack of EV inventory at Virginia auto dealerships, and that's a real problem long term. I think there was a survey that we saw of Virginians found 53% are likely or very likely to consider an EV for the next car, but without the inventory, you know, they're going to have the same problems that Mr. Cook had. And so one thing that I think people should definitely consider is, I think that Virginia should consider is joining, I think it's 13 other states that have adopted the Advanced Clean Cars program and their vehicle standards. And so if we join other US states that have already adopted low emission vehicle and zero emission vehicle standards to accelerate EV adoption, I mean, as a part of that ZEV or ZEV implementation, it'll require auto manufacturers to send EVs to Virginia's new car dealerships. And so it's a mandate for the manufacturers, not for the dealers themselves, but that would definitely increase the availability of electric vehicle cars in Virginia. And so people would not have to cross the river into Maryland to go buy an electric vehicle car. And so I think it would be very easy if Virginia would simply, you know, get on board with the Advanced Clean Cars program and their vehicle standards, like 13 other states have.
Delegate Reid.
Yes, Blair, thanks. And Finest, you know, really good question. And I just want to add a couple additional comments to what Senator Hashmi had already been talking about. So one, being able to get the people who are at the point of sale. And I will tell you, this is one thing, is that I was talking earlier today with the director for the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association, and they are 100% on board with the fact that they want to be able to sell electric vehicles. And they recognize that that is the wave of the future. And of course, you heard from Ms. Borches earlier, who of course, they're committed to doing this as well. So I think what you're doing is you're seeing kind of a sea change in the fact that there is this recognition that this is the wave of the future. And as Senator Hashmi pointed out, they want to be involved with this. They need to be able to make a profit. They want to be able to continue those family businesses that they've had in place for 10, 20, or 30 years. And Blair, I know that we're probably quickly running out of time, but we're slowly discussing my EV rebate program. And one of the other things that I wanted to add is one of the things that came out of the work group study was some way to actually incentivize a salesperson who's actually going to be learning more about electric vehicles and then sharing that information with the consumer who's coming in to buy. So we might do a $2,500 rebate to Finest for him to buy it, and there might be $50 or $100 that goes to the salesperson. So then everybody wins. And it very much goes to one of the earlier discussions that Delegate Lopez had pointed out, is that when we're looking at this, we have to make sure that it is actually something that is beneficial to everyone. And this is something that I believe that everybody can find value in, whether you're Republican, Democrat, consumer, or salesperson. I think everyone can find value in moving towards an electric vehicle program.
Thank you, Delegate Reid. And Delegate Keam, will you bring us home?
Sure. I just want to add a couple more points to this. Last year, I had the pleasure of working on a bill, House Bill 577, which was to adopt the California Clean Air Standards and require that our air pollution board adopt standards to require that 11 ZEV cars be produced here. And of course, there are different deadlines. And I actually was lobbied pretty hard against the bill by the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. And I've worked with them in the past on many issues. In fact, the very first time that the Tesla auto dealerships opened up in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but both places, both the sales store and the service store, were both in my district in Tysons. And so I had a chance to really try to negotiate both the traditional auto dealers and the Tesla dealership to make sure that they understand what the limits are and what we're trying to accommodate for both sides. And we've had those conversations many times. Their main concern was that they were fine with LEV, but not with ZEV, because ZEV is such a newer technology, and that they felt that that was going to be a bit of a limit on them because they didn't have the manpower, the knowledge, let alone the inventory. I also had a long conversation with some of the auto manufacturers, including Volkswagen, which of course is headquartered in Virginia, and they raised the same concern, which is it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg. In the long run, they understand that's where they want to be, but right now, forcing them on the supply side to be the maker of change versus consumer side, the rebates and other programs that other my colleagues are doing. So they wanted to see if there was a way that we can slow down the process and not necessarily be the first one. But to the point that you've heard from other of my colleagues, this is a year where there's been tremendous momentum. Just from last year alone, just since last year when I had the bill, to this year when we're going to have more robust opportunities, I think things are changing quickly. And at the federal level, I think there's signals going to be sent to the entire auto manufacturers. And at this crisis, when people are not driving as much anyway because of COVID, when the economy starts coming back again, I think a lot of people are going to be much more conscious about what kind of car they want to have. And so I think this is absolutely the era of Lev and Zev, and we got to be at the front end of the curve. And the auto dealers will work with them, but they'll need to come along because that's where we're going to go.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. And our next question is very much on topic. So thank you, Finest. Thank you so much for joining us. Always good to see you. Our next question is from Anna, and she's joining us from Northern Virginia, and her question is actually for Delegate Lopez. Anna?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm joining you from Fairfax, Virginia. My husband and I recently purchased an electric vehicle because we strongly believe that the climate crisis is indeed that, a crisis, and we want to be part of the solution for that. So this is our first vehicle we've actually ever owned. And we've used public transportation for work up to this point, but I couldn't get to my place of work any longer via public transit when I changed jobs. So we ended up knowing pretty quickly we had to go to Maryland to find inventory, as we keep talking about. So that's where we were looking. We did miss out on one deal because it was only for residents of states that were part of the Advanced Clean Car Program that you mentioned. So that was quite frustrating. It was a VW dealership on Delegate Keam's point. So we missed out on that deal, which would have been better for us. We would have had more range on that vehicle than the one we got, as well as a better deal. So given that public transportation isn't really a viable option for every Virginian, and given the number of Virginians like us who had to purchase our EVs out of state, how do you think that you can ensure in a timely manner that we don't have to do that going forward? What's holding us back? What's the timeline?
Mute. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for the question, Hannah. I really do appreciate that. I don't want to get political here, but Republicans were holding us back. Well, that's what was holding us back in the past. Now we have a progressive Democratic majority that is actually interested in embracing things like the Clean Economy Act, like electric vehicles, and the regulatory programs necessary to put them in place, and the infrastructure systems necessary to put them in place in Virginia. And I don't want to make this partisan, but it just coming back to my original answer, which was we need to adopt the Advanced Clean Cars Program in Virginia. We should join, over a dozen states that have already embraced this policy. We should do it as well in Virginia. It would create a requirement that manufacturers need to send electric vehicles into Virginia. Dealers would not have to take them, but there would be that mandate. And so that would create the ability and the opportunity for myself and my family and you and your family not to have to go to these other states, not have to go to Maryland. The numbers are pretty stark in terms of availability. And so I think that program in and of itself is one of the cleanest, fastest things we can do. And on top of that, I think we need to think about rebate programs. We need to incentivize these programs at the federal level. There's going to be an omnibus renewable energy package that comes out, I think, in the first 100 days of President Biden and Vice President Harris's administration. It's going to talk about these issues and talk about electric vehicles. And I think it's a holistic thing where you have to do it from the federal level as well as the state level to create the infrastructure so that what you and your family had to go through doesn't happen again.
Thank you so much, Delegate Lopez. We have 20 minutes left, everybody, so we're sort of moving into a lightning round to get to all of the remaining questions. But at the very end, if there are any remaining points that you haven't been able to add, we will absolutely circle back. Tiziana is joining us. Anna, thank you so much. We really appreciated your question. Our next question is for Delegate Keam, And I believe Tiziana from Others Out Front in Northern Virginia has just joined us. Tiziana?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Blair, for getting together such an amazing panel. And good evening, Delegate Keam. So we know that children are particularly sensitive to transportation emissions, and there are 16,000 school buses in Virginia. They are mostly diesel. How can we electrify these buses in an equitable manner that protects our children? Thank you for all you do.
Oh, thank you. It's good to see you, Tiziana, and thank you and Mothers Out Front for all that you've done. Last year, one of my favorite bills, I did about 45 bills, but one of my favorite ones was a bill to electrify our school buses from what it is to where it ought to be. And the concept behind the bill was very simple. I think all of you will understand instinctively that not only do we want to get rid of diesel buses because of the emissions, but when you have the most precious cargo you can imagine in those buses, our children breathing the smog and the pollutants that come out of the diesel buses, as well as the fact that those cars are at some point going to run out of technology and such, and you're going to have to upgrade anyway. Why don't we replace it with something that's a clean carbon car, and also that has my friend Paul Krizek will tell you, have seatbelts and all the other safety measures as well. And so the idea was to put together a plan in Virginia that says, here's a pot of money that the state will put together, along with working with whoever we need to, and then we'll use that fund to subsidize the delta between what a school board would cost to replace a bus with a regular bus versus electrifying that bus. And so we would just incentivize the local governments to be able to upgrade their buses as it comes. Somebody mentioned earlier that there are roughly 1625 school buses just in Fairfax alone. And so it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of patience to get to that point. The bill was introduced last year, and it came out of the committees and it went to the appropriations because of the fiscal concern that they had. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars that the state would have to put up. And so we wanted to think it through a little bit. This year, thanks to the work that Tiziana and so many other people are doing, we think we found at least one revenue source for that. So it's a new way to tap something that's not being taxed right now, that's a diesel product. And so I think that we might be able to start off with a small, modest pilot program, but obviously it'll have to expand. Now, I just want to make sure we understand, in full transparency, there are other people that have been talking about electrifying school buses, including Dominion, that has its own pilot program. The governor has his own program using some of the funds from the Volkswagen settlement. And I'm sure there are many other programs, smart people out there doing that. We welcome that. We certainly welcome it. There's so many buses that there's no one program that can fund all of it. So I'd be happy to work with anybody to make this happen. But the way I look at it is schools, public education is a core function of government. And so if the government is not involved in directing and managing the program and being held accountable, this is not something you want to privatize to a third-party company that's in it for the profit. So what we want to do is have a program that the state funds and the state manages, and then our kids and the society at large will benefit. So I look forward to working with all of you. It's going to be my highest priority next year, and hopefully we can get something done. And thanks to my colleagues for supporting it.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. Thank you so much, Tiziana. Always great to see you. So our next question is from Kevin Vincent, and he is joining us from Northern Virginia. And this question is for Delegate Bulova.
Thank you, Blair. Thank you, Generation 180, for putting on this event. Thank you, all the members of the legislature who appeared tonight. It's great to see y'all here. We've been talking about cars mostly, and I want to turn the subject to trucks. There was an announcement recently that Volvo Trucks is going to be building electric trucks in Virginia, but they're actually going to be selling them out of state, going to be selling them to California and to other jurisdictions. And that is a function of the fact that other states have policies that incentivize and require electric trucks. In particular, another development this year is that there was a multi-state medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicle memorandum of understanding that was signed by 15 states and the District of Columbia, starting with California, including New York and the states in the Northeast, but also our neighbors in Maryland and the district and south of us in North Carolina have all signed on to the 15-state MOU. And that includes a number of provisions to lead to truck electrification, including a requirement to have 30% of trucks by 2030 be zero emission and 100% by 2050. And my question is, do we have a similar program underway in Virginia, or will we have one to join that MOU with our sister states? And specifically, is there anything the legislature can do to create a ZEV standard for trucks like the one that hopefully is coming for cars? Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you very much for that question. And I guess one of the dangers of being a state legislator is that we're a jack of all trades, master of none. And so we tend to be generalists who are passionate about electric vehicles and how do we go ahead and move that forward. And so one of the reasons why I was really looking forward to be part of this panel is that a lot of the questions really get us thinking about what it is that we can do in Virginia to help move those forward. And so I don't know the specific answer to your question. However, to the degree that we are not fully engaging in pushing that forward, I couldn't agree more that we need to go ahead and do that. And so, you know, I was taking copious notes as you were talking, and will definitely follow up and would invite any of my fellow panelists to jump in with their ideas about how we can push that forward. Before I lose you, because I know that you know, there were a number of different questions with respect to rebates and financial incentives. And so a question was asked about, you know, what are the hurdles that are out there? And so, you know, some of the hurdles that are out there, they are philosophical, but a good number of them are just budget considerations. And so when the Democrats took over this last session, you know, I was very fortunate with some of my colleagues, Delegate Reid and Delegate Plum, to be put on Appropriations Committee. And the nice thing about Appropriations Committee is that you help to make big decisions about budget. The bad thing is that you pass really good policy in commerce and labor or in ag and natural resources, and then it comes back to you, and now you're like, oh my God, we got to figure out how to fund this. And so you love the policy, but in Virginia, like most states, our Constitution says that we have to balance our budget each year. And so you do have to prioritize and sometimes make very tough decisions. And so that's kind of where you all come in as advocates, because we do make decisions based on prioritization of our resources. Now, right now, it's really tough because we were facing a $2 billion budget shortfall, you know, but we're going to get out of that. And eventually we're going to start making decisions about where to put that money. And so it's very important to hear from advocates that, you know, not only do you support these policies, but you're reaching out to appropriators to say we need to be able to fund these policies, and more specifically, make the case that, you know, climate change is very important, but one of the most efficient ways that we can deal with climate change are to make investments in clean vehicles and clean trucks. And that really helps set the stage for that. But anyways, great question. And if my colleagues here on the panel want to jump in who have more specificity on the ones that you asked, I'd ask them to jump on in.
Delegate Bulova, you're stealing my very last question, but let's let David Reid respond.
So thanks, Blair. And Kevin, it's good to see you again. I don't have all the answers to the questions that you had asked, but I will say this, that the second piece of EV legislation that I am carrying this year is to actually increase the truck weight that's allowed on Virginia highways by 2,000 pounds, which would take into account the fact that those types of semi-trucks are generally heavier if they're electric than they are if they're gas. So that starts to pave the way, no pun intended, to be able to allow for larger trucks that are electrified also. And so I think you bring up a really good point, because those Volvo trucks are being made in Dublin, Virginia, and we are all very proud of the fact that that's a manufacturing facility here in Virginia, and that we would like to be able to see those trucks on Virginia highways.
Absolutely. Kevin, thank you so much. Good to see you. Our next question is actually for Delegate Plum, and it's from Mark Lemon, who just turned his video on. Mark joins us from Virginia Clean Cities, and again, his question is for Delegate Plum.
Thank you to Generation 180 and all of our legislators for being here this evening. First, let me say, I think that Mr. Reid's pun was intended. I think it was fantastic, very good one. We have had lots of discussion tonight about ways to incentivize EV adoption amongst individual Virginians. I think one of the fastest ways to move the needle would be to increase EV deployment amongst corporate and municipal fleets. I would love to hear your thoughts about how state policies can incentivize that.
Well, thank you for that question, Mark. I will tell you that I was thinking that the last question was going to be Blair giving us a couple of minutes to summarize our thoughts on the matter. And what I was going to say was,
that's next. That's next.
Additionally, what we need to do is to make sure that we invest as a government in EV vehicles, that we in fact put our money where our mouths are. And if it's good policy for the public at large, then it should be good investments for local government and state government. Now, the fact of the matter is that's happening to a degree in some locations. It's not a totally new idea. But I agree with the premise of your remarks that what we should do is to make that investment as well. The more people, the more demand that we create, the cost of vehicles will go down. The more we see electric vehicles being successful on the roads, the more willingness we'll have on the part of the public to buy one. And so I want to tell you that, Blair, when I joined the panel tonight, I was hoping that I was thinking the format was to be that we were going to get specific recommendations from you because I wanted to learn. As Delegate Bulova says, we're not experts on all this. But it's from Kevin's remark earlier about the memorandum of understanding among states that we're not part of. I would love it if someone would make sure that we get some paper on that to know what that's all about, because we need to be encouraging of our government to participate in something like that. So to all who all sponsored this, thank you very much for doing it. It's been very informative to me. And Mark, I agree with you entirely. We need to make investments as a government in EV vehicles.
Delegate Reid.
So thanks, Blair. And Mark, good question. I think that Virginia Clean Cities actually participated in the work group over the summer. And one of the things that came out of the EV work group study was a recommendation that the rebate program should also apply to fleet vehicles, because to your very point is that that's a way to be able to actually get this out to a large group of vehicles all at once. And I'm going to borrow back from one of the things that Delegate Bulova talked about with us being on appropriations. From the time that the pandemic started and the budget that we had on March the 12th, we now actually have more priorities and less money than what we had, on March the 12th. And the difficult part about this is going to be able prioritizing where that rebate money goes to. Because I will tell you that in the work group, they had proposed not only for both consumers, but for fleet vehicle sales, which would make the annual cost for the rebate program somewhere in the neighborhood of about $40 million. And that's $40 million annually while we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we're going to have to make some very difficult choices about how we move forward with this. But your point is well taken. And it came out in the work group as a way to be able to electrify the greatest amount of vehicles in one kind of fell swoop. So thank you for that comments. And again, it's on our radar. We just have to figure out how to fund a lot of these things.
Delegate Bulova, final follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to kind of follow up on a very specific piece of legislation that you're probably going to see in the General Assembly this year that I believe Delegate Dan Helmer, also from Fairfax County, is going to put in. And so in Virginia, we already have something called the Virginia High Performance Buildings Act that requires most state buildings to be LEED certified or Green Globe certified or go through some kind of certification process. Two of the weaknesses of that are, number one, it does not focus in on the EV readiness part of all this. And so there's lots of different ways you can get LEED certified without necessarily making sure that your building and your parking areas are EV ready. And so we want to get more specific about focusing in on that aspect for state buildings. The other weakness is that the High Performance Building Act doesn't require localities to engage in this at all. And so, we certainly have a number of state buildings that are built each year, but, most of the infrastructure is going to be built by your localities. And so being able to take that High Performance Building Act and then pushing that down to the localities, I think it's got a great amount of potential to make sure that we're getting the infrastructure in place, at least in terms of our public fleets. And then lastly, and I don't know if it'll be part of this legislation or not, it's how to use the procurement process to again incentivize the use of electric vehicles. And so while they might be a little more expensive up front, and again, we budget yearly, and so oftentimes you go with the least cost for the immediate future, to be able to build into the procurement process life cycle costs. And that way, through the procurement process, you're actually giving electric vehicles a leg up, because at some point they cross that threshold, and over their lifetime, they do become more efficient. So those are a couple bills that I suspect you'll see in the 2021 session.
Thank you for those responses.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark, so much for joining us. Our second to last question, noting that we are about 4 minutes from the end of our program. We're joined by Emily Johnson, who has a final question for Delegate Reid.
Thank you, Blair. So Delegate Reid, I've noticed that you touched on the question that I have based on questions by Charles in Finance. So I am more than happy to give you the opportunity to continue that discussion on something that clearly you're very passionate about. And my question is, point of sale EV incentives would help make EVs more accessible for so many Virginians. However, there are still communities who aren't familiar with electric vehicle technology. How would you promote the incentive and increase awareness overall to make sure the point of sale rebate is well utilized?
So Emily, that is a really good question, because one of the discussions that I've had with the Automobile Dealers Association is you have to think about the fact that they're the ones who currently are advertising to all the communities, trying to get them to buy vehicles. So if there's a rebate program in place that also includes both new and used vehicles and actually provides more money to people who are of low or moderate incomes than just the folks who can, let's just say, afford a vehicle already, and you're actually providing an incentive to the salesperson, then you've really got kind of the right combination, where what's going to happen is the marketing is going to occur at the local dealership level, because they're going to try to get knowledge out there and get people to come in. And by actually doing that, we will then also stimulate demand so that there will be actually more vehicles that are coming into the state. So it all really kind of plays together. I mean, if you look at doing the rebates and the fact that you're going to be giving more money to low and moderate income people, and you're also including new and used, and the dealers are getting a little bit of an incentive, then all of a sudden the marketing occurs across all of those hundreds, if not thousands, of dealerships across the state. And I think that's how we get the information out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Delegate Reid. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining us and hanging tight to the very end of the program. So our very last question tonight for all of you who have joined us. And again, thank you so much to all of our General Assembly members for being here with us for this very, very riveting 90 minutes, all about electric vehicles and electric transportation. We want to give you all one final opportunity to leave us with your closing thoughts, and in particular, what your advice is to Virginians who are looking to advocate for transportation electrification during this unusual virtual General Assembly. And Senator Hashmi, I would like to give you the mic first.
Thank you so much. And I'll just quickly say that in terms of advocacy, this is a powerful vehicle. What you've just done this evening is a very powerful vehicle for spreading the message, for sharing knowledge. And I certainly encourage folks to reach out to their particular representative, and as Delegate Bagby said, point out that you are a constituent and make the case for EV vehicles. One thing that I would stress also, something that we didn't quite cover this evening, is the need to bring EV manufacturing right here to Virginia. It's a wonderful opportunity to provide jobs to particularly underserved communities in our rural regions, bringing manufacturing jobs back that are high quality, high paying, and that also attract highly skilled technology workers. I think we have a wonderful opportunity to diversify our workforce and to bring jobs into rural communities and the kind of jobs that we need in those areas. So thank you again for letting me join you this evening.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to just go across my screen as you come in my order. So Delegate Lopez, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you all for being on this call this evening. Thank you to all my colleagues in the House and the Senate for being here. You know, I started the Virginia Environment and Renewable Energy Caucus, in 2013. And it was the only place that we were able to actually bring delegates and senators together to talk about these issues, about renewable energy, about environmental protection in the Commonwealth. And now we have that still, that has been, we have, you know, one of the co-founders with me were Rip Sullivan and David Bulova and Don McEachin, who's now a member of Congress, and the co-chairs with me as well. And I'm so very heartened by the fact that we went from, you know, being in a small room in the Pocahontas building and maybe having 15, 20 folks come together to now, and hoping that we get bills passed, to now truly doing so many great things in terms of environmental protection, in terms of electric vehicles, in terms of renewable energy. The Virginia Clean Economy Act last year was a game changer. And it moved us from being one of the worst states in America in terms of climate change to one of the best states of America in terms of addressing climate change. And it's changed the entire conversation across the state. And this movement now, in terms of addressing electric vehicles and the fact that we have such a broad coalition of folks who care about it and are fighting for it in this upcoming session, is a major step forward to addressing everything we want to do in terms of climate, everything we want to do in terms of the environment. And so I cannot ask you enough as strongly as I am about to, but please do everything you can to advocate, text, call, email, every one of your members of the House of Delegates, Republican, Democrat, and say this is a good thing for the environment, it's a good thing for job creation, it's a good thing for economic development. Whatever resonates with that one member, they need to hear it from you, especially if you live in their community, like Lamont was mentioning before. That means so much more. If they get a handwritten card from you, that means a great deal. And express where you are, because we're listening. We're always listening. We're always fighting for people in our communities. And so collectively, though, all of us together can continue to sort of move this ball forward. An electric vehicle, embracing the infrastructure, embracing the regulatory process is going to be such an important part for our long-term efforts of protecting the environment, conserving our open space, and conserving and addressing climate change in Virginia. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Delegate Bulova.
Right. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who had a hand in organizing this tonight. This has been really wonderful. And I've learned a lot just from the dialogue and the questions. And so you've armed me with better information going into the 2021 session and beyond. And I really do believe that this is all about kind of hitting a tipping point. It's that spark that's going to get it moving. And I think with the right measures in place, thoughtfully put in with some incentives, that ultimately the consumers are going to demand these things, and you're going to hit that tipping point, and I think we'll move ahead really, really quickly. And so let me just kind of wrap it up. I don't want to spend too much time, but just to build off of some things that I heard other people say. So the statistics are important, and so when you're engaging, it is important to come armed with facts and figures, because this does have so many different linkages. And so you need to link it to climate change. You need to think it to the potential for economic growth, and you need to make those connectivities to health and other aspects of the environment, including water quality. And that leads to what Lamont was saying, and that is, constituents matter. And so when you engage in advocacy, make sure that you're connecting with the right people. And not all of us are your legislators, and so you're going to be engaging, with Democrats and Republicans, and so it's important to know your audience and to tailor your message so that it can resonate with a person from a number of different perspectives. And I guess last but not least is just make sure that you engage on a personal level. It's incredible how far we've come, at least from the part of the journey that I have been involved with, with the electric vehicle charging station legislation, that I had no earthly idea what I was doing back in 2011, passing that legislation. But the next leap forward came in 2017, because the original one was aimed at just private sector. And then, we knew that the public sector had to be a part of this, because we own lots of areas where people go and can fuel up. And this gets to the point that we need to engage. We need to engage our young people who are going to be in this for the long haul. And so the bill that I introduced as a follow-on to that original legislation in 2017 was to allow school districts, school systems to install electric vehicle charging stations and to charge for them. And the idea actually came from two students at Thomas Jefferson High School up in Fairfax County. And they are the ones who reached out to their school board members, who reached out to me, who actually came down and testified before subcommittee in Richmond. And they're the ones who got this legislation passed with their passion and their knowledge and their know-how. And so I'm very convinced that, number one, everybody should engage, but we need to make sure that we're getting our youth very involved in all of this, because they really can make a huge difference.
Thank you. Delegate Reid.
So thank you, Blair, and thanks again, everybody, for being here and for all of the attendees, and thanks also, Stuart. I will have to say that Senator Hashmi kind of stole some of my thunder as far as some of the things that I wanted to talk about. But let me just start with this kind of bit of information. I know everyone's really very familiar with this, and one of the reasons why we want to do this, and Delegate Bulova talked about it, is that this transportation sector still accounts for about 40% of the carbon emissions that are produced in Virginia. And so if we want to be able to make additional substantial changes in the carbon emissions in Virginia, then we have to be able to tackle it in the transportation sector. And so that's a real key environmental reason to be able to do this. But I want to also then kind of talk about the jobs aspect of it. So if we kind of think through this and think about how we connect the dots together, where we have an EV rebate program and we have incentives, and that then in turn generates additional infrastructure, and that creates more jobs. And then Virginia is perceived to be EV friendly. And then what will hopefully happen is, in addition to just Volvo bringing a manufacturing facility to Dublin, other companies will be able to want to come here and actually start their manufacturing plants here, do parts facilities, or do assembly here. And that will create a lot of really good jobs in some areas that we need to have economic development in. There are areas across Southside and down in Southwest Virginia where there's land available, there's rail access, and those are all areas that could actually benefit by the fact that we might start this process just by having an EV rebate program that then results in job creation across the entire state of Virginia. And so I think that's one of the big takeaways that we need to leave from this with, is that it has both an environmental benefit as well as the potential for a job creation benefit. And thanks again.
Delegate Keam.
Yeah, thank you. And I echo all of my colleagues in thanking Generation 180 and all of the audience members for spending time tonight to learn about this. This is not only an exciting time, as you just heard, in terms of all the changes that are happening, but it is a time that if we miss this opportunity, we'll be set back even more. So it's absolutely critical that we take this time and this opportunity, this golden chance that we have to make a difference in our Commonwealth's future and really do the part. Some of us who are on this call who happen to have the honor of being in the legislature, we can do the policy side. We can tweak the laws. We can make sure we put into the code section the incentives and get rid of the hurdles and the obstacles so that we can free up the private sector from doing things without the government's laws and obstacles in the way. But the demand has to come from the private sector, from the economy, from consumers, from families, from kids, from everybody who wants this. And I want to share a little story because what David Reid just mentioned, reminded me that, and I know there are some questions about bipartisanship or lack of bipartisanship in some of this. And there was a time when if you drove a Prius, which I used to do, people just looked at you like, oh, you must be a liberal. You don't even have to have like a Hillary Clinton sign on your car, because if you're driving a Prius, you must be a liberal. But if you're driving a pickup truck, then you must be a conservative. And so people tend to judge you based on the car and based on your lifestyle and what have you. Well, that was the way it was. But years ago, about 15 years ago, so I went on a business trip to West Virginia. It was my first big trip into West Virginia, into one of the very rural areas. It was to meet with some business folks down there. And I was with a colleague of mine who was a Caucasian gentleman who actually had some connections to West Virginia. So when we flew into the airport, we're in the car and I'm driving down there and I'm thinking, and I didn't want to be rude about it, but I told my colleague, I said, hey, I'm just a little nervous because frankly, West Virginia is the whitest state in the country. And I don't know if they're used to seeing people that look like me, especially wearing a business suit. So I just hope that, if anything, if anybody feels uncomfortable with me in that environment, that you can kind of have my back. And he looked at me and says, don't worry, you actually look perfect for this being here. I said, what does that mean? So sure enough, we pull into a gas station to pick up some water or something on the way to this meeting. And the first gentleman I run into, I mean, stereotypically looks like a biker from one of those like Hell's Angels movies, right? This big guy with tattoos. And I'm thinking like, how are you, sir? I looked at him and he says, hey, nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. And I welcome you. I'm thinking, what was that all about? He says, the reason is because until recently, this place was devastated. No jobs. The economy was really run down. And then Toyota decided to invest millions of dollars in putting an assembly line there and creating all kinds of jobs. So when they see an Asian or an Asian American, they are so grateful because they identify Toyota as a job creator. So they couldn't care less about discrimination or racism. All they care about is that you are bringing jobs here. So just go along with it. So I became instantaneously a Japanese business executive for that weekend. But I tell you that story because I think the idea of electric vehicles could be a game changer where the moment you have, I can't remember who it was, said, when are the trucks, the pick trucks, electric vehicles going to be on the market? When are the Volvo trucks and other trucks going to be on the market? When is Ford going to turn their entire fleet into electric vehicles? When is FedEx and UPS and Amazon and all these other companies that are on the road all the time, when are they going to electrify their vehicles? Once you see that governments and businesses and even some of our conservative neighbors and friends choose an electric option because the market is there, then I think you're going to break away this image that electric cars and hybrids for a bunch of liberals in Northern Virginia. And when you start seeing charging stations because of our laws and rebates because of our laws, that's when I think you're going to see a groundswell of demand. So I'm looking forward to that day, but it's not going to happen if you just dream about it. Thanks to my colleagues and thanks to the work that you're doing, it's going to happen because we work together and create results.
Thank you, Delegate Keam. Delegate Plum and then Delegate Bagby to wrap us up.
Yes, I would hope, Blair, that we could end on a hopeful note. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to Generation 180 and all the sponsoring organizations for putting this together. What a wonderful idea it was and a format I really liked. But I want you to be hopeful because the reason there's so many legislators on this call is because it's a hot topic. It's the future. It's a place where we need to go. And while we aren't progressing maybe at the rate you would like, progress is being made. And of course, I can say that because I've been around here a long time. And I remember how that first little Prius that I bought looked and ran, and look at Priuses now and what the progress we've made. There's greater acceptance on the part of the community, their local governments that are buying electric vehicles. We're on the right track. That's not to suggest that you should relax. It's not to suggest you shouldn't do more. It's to suggest to you that really we are moving forward and you can help us move forward. Now, as a comment made earlier, I think it was by David Bulova, that, we're generalists. We can't be experts in all this. And so while it was a nice format tonight for you to ask us questions, which makes an assumption maybe that we know, I would suggest to you also as advocates, I found out through the questions that you posed tonight that you all have been really thinking about this and you've been doing research about it. Now, supposedly we're part-time legislators. Now, I'm otherwise retired and I kind of knock around about this about full time. And even those who work otherwise spend an enormous amount of hours on doing this. We don't have a lot of research staff available to us. So you can be a great arm to us. You can be the researchers, the thinkers, and the advocates so that you not only say, why don't you? You can also say, as was obvious in some of the questions tonight, here's what's happening in other states and here's what Virginia ought to be doing. That's enormous help to us. I will tell you, I'd love to have a bright idea that a whole lot of people support that's good for our environment and good for our quality of life. And I'll go running with it because I know, for example, my constituents will like it and so will the public at large. So again, your work is vitally important. Stay in touch with us, shore us up, help us break through to the public. And thank you again for the event tonight and look forward to working with you because we're going to make progress on this thing. And when we get together 10 years from now, it's going to be amazing as to how electric vehicles have really taken over the market. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Plum. Delegate Bagby, would you like to take us home?
Yes. So again, thank you, Blair, and thank your entire team for putting this together. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity now to get you some supper and play with your dogs before you adjourn for the evening. And I also just want to thank my colleagues for again, making time to talk and taking time to listen. I got to echo number one, Ken Plum. I've learned a great deal. And that's what it's all about for us is learning how we can be better advocates ourselves and better legislators. And that's by being well informed. And we learned that by not only hearing from our constituents, but individuals that are really focused on issues like the individuals we heard from today. And so with that, God bless and good night.
Thank you all from the bottom of my heart and from all of us at Generation 180 for joining us, and all of our attendees for joining us as well. Stay safe and happy holidays. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for your participation.
Good night.